On my husband's 35th birthday, his mother toasted to my empty womb before a room full of socialites. Moments later, I overheard her paying a doctor to make sure I stayed that way. It took me 5 years to return, but when I did, I brought two things they never expected. I had the twin grandsons they were desperate for, and I held the legal documents to strip them of their entire empire. My name is Arver Williams, and standing in the center of the Carver Grand Hotel ballroom, I felt less like a wife and more like an unauthorized prop in a stage play I had never auditioned for. The air in the room was thick, not with humidity, but with the suffocating weight of old money. It smelled of imported lees, chilled champagne, and the kind of perfume that lingers in a room long after the wearer has left, asserting dominance even in their absence. It was my husband's 35th birthday, Nathaniel Carver, the golden boy of Lakewood Heights real estate, the heir to the Carver Lux dynasty, and the man who currently seemed to be doing everything in his power to avoid looking at me. Nate stood near the ice sculpture, a ridiculous chiseled swan that was slowly weeping onto the tablecloth, laughing at a joke made by a senator. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, the sharp lines of his jaw illuminated by the amber glow of the crystal chandeliers. But whenever his eyes swept the room, they skipped over me like a stone skipping over water. I took a sip of my sparkling water, my fingers tightening around the stem of the glass. I was wearing a midnight blue silk gown that I had purchased on an installment plan, $300 a month for 6 months to the women in this room. That sum was a rounding error on a lunch bill. To me, it was a sacrifice made in the desperate hope that if I dressed the part, maybe I would finally stop feeling like an imposter in my own marriage. Arver, dear. A voice sliced through the jazz music. It was sharp, polished, and devoid of any actual warmth. I turned to see Elena Carver gliding toward me. My mother-in-law was 60 years old, but looked a decade younger. Thanks to a team of surgeons and a soul that had seemingly been cryogenically frozen to preserve its hardness, she wore emeralds that likely cost more than the house I grew up in. "Elena," I said, forcing a smile that made my cheeks ache. "The party is beautiful." "It is, isn't it?" She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on the heavy velvet drapes and the waiters moving with synchronized precision. Then her eyes snapped back to me, dropping to my stomach before moving up to my face. "Nate looks tired. Don't you think he works so hard to build a legacy? It is a shame he has no one to pass it down to yet." The jab was practiced routine. "We are trying, Elena," I whispered, the shame hot and familiar rising in my throat. "Are you?" She tilted her head, a predator examining wounded prey. A real woman knows how to give her family a future. A Carver wife has one job. Arver, just one, and it has been 5 years. She patted my arm. The touch was light, but it felt like a brand. "Maybe drink less water and try something stronger tonight. Since you are clearly not carrying anything, you might as well enjoy yourself." She drifted away before I could respond, leaving me standing there while the blood drained from my face. I looked around, desperate for Nate, desperate for him to come over and wrap an arm around my waist, to be the shield he used to be when we were dating. But as he was busy refilling his scotch, his back turned to me. I tried to blend into the scenery, but the other wives found me. They were a flock of birds in designer feathers circling. Arver, still no nursery news, asked Mrs. Ken Holloway, a woman whose 3 daughters were all married to investment bankers. "Not yet," I managed to say. "Oh, honey, have you tried that specialist in Geneva? My niece went there. Twins on the first try." Nate must be getting impatient. Another woman chimed in, lowering her voice to a theatrical whisper. "Men have needs, legacies to build. You do not want him looking elsewhere for an heir." I looked over at Nate again. He caught my eye this time. I offered a weak, pleading smile. He frowned, checking his watch, and turned away to speak to a waiter. The rejection was small, quiet, and absolutely devastating. The jazz band slowed their tempo, transitioning into a soft roll of drums. The lights dimmed, focusing on the small stage at the front of the room. Elena was standing there, a microphone in one hand and a flute of champagne in the other. "If I could have everyone's attention," Elena announced. Her voice commanded silence instantly. The clinking of silverware stopped. The laughter died down. "Tonight we celebrate my son, Nathaniel," she began. Her voice was honey poured over broken glass. 35 years of excellence, 35 years of making the Carver name proud. He has built skyscrapers, negotiated mergers, and led our family company with a vision that honors his late father. Applause rippled through the room. Nate stepped up beside her, looking appropriately humble. But Eleanor continued, her tone shifting. The smile stayed fixed on her face, but her eyes hardened as they sought me out in the crowd. She pointedly looked at me, forcing every head in the room to turn in my direction. A man's life is measured not just by what he builds, but by what he leaves behind, and it breaks a mother's heart to see her son's legacy stall. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Please stop," I begged silently. "Please do not do this." "So on this birthday," Elena said, raising her glass higher, "I made a wish for my son. I wish for him to find the future he deserves, because a man of his stature should not be anchored by a barren vessel." The word hung in the air, barren. To Nate, she declared, her voice ringing with cruel clarity, "May you find the strength to make the hard choices. You deserve a woman of class who can give you an heir, not just a burden." The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted for 2 seconds, but it felt like 2 centuries. Then a few nervous titters of laughter broke out, initiated by Eleanor's closest circle, and soon the room joined in an awkward forced chuckle that was meant to smooth over the brutality of the moment. Nate did not defend me. He stared at his shoes, his jaw tight, his face flushed with embarrassment, but he said nothing. He did not look at me. I felt the tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging. I could not breathe. The walls of the ballroom, covered in gold leaf and silk, felt like they were closing in to crush me. I turned on my heel, clutching my clutch bag to my chest, and walked as fast as I could without running toward the service exit. I pushed through the heavy double doors into the service corridor. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the hum of industrial refrigerators and the clatter of the kitchen staff further down the hall. I leaned against the cool plaster wall, gasping for air. Barren, the word echoed in my mind. Vessel. I needed water. I needed to wash my face. I navigated the maze of hallways, looking for a staff restroom or a quiet corner. I found myself in a narrow corridor behind the private VIP lounge, a space reserved for the family to take breaks during long events. The door was slightly ajar. I was about to push it open when I heard a voice that froze my blood. It was a bit harsh. "Elena, even for you." It was Dr. Morgan Foster, the family obstetrician, the man who had been treating me for 2 years, the man who had told me month after month that my egg quality was too low, that my uterus was hostile, that I was biologically broken. Harsh. Eleanor's voice was dismissive. I heard the sound of ice hitting the glass. It was necessary. Nate is sentimental. He needs a push. If I humiliate her enough, she will leave on her own. It saves us the mess of a legal battle over the prenuptial terms. I stood frozen in the shadows, my hand hovering over the door handle. "Well, doctor," a Foster sighed, "you might want to accelerate the timeline." She was asking questions during the last appointment, asking about second opinions. "She would seek one," Eleanor snapped. "She trusts you. You are the best in the state. If Dr. Morgan Foster says she's broken, she believes she is broken." "I suppose," Foster said, "but I cannot keep her on the regimen forever." Eleanor, "It is risky." If any other doctor ran a standard blood panel and saw the levels of synthetic progesterone in her system, they would know. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. "They are just vitamins, Morgan," Elena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "That is what we told her. Vitamin shots to support her hormonal balance. Just keep giving her the injections. I paid you $50,000 last year to ensure that the medical file remains creative. Do not grow a conscience now." "I am not growing a conscience," Foster replied, the sound of paper shuffling following his words. "I am growing concerned about liability. The shots are essentially a high-dose long-term contraceptive. It is chemical sterilization. As long as she is on them, if she stops, she could conceive within 6 months. You are paying me to suppress a perfectly healthy reproductive system, and I will pay you another 50,000 to keep your mouth shut and keep the needle in her arm until Nate signs the divorce papers." Elena hissed. "She is a gold digger from the suburbs. Morgan, she is polluting the bloodline. I am doing the family a service." I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the scream that was clawing its way up my throat. They were not vitamins for 2 years. I had endured the injections, the nausea, the weight gain, the mood swings. I had let them inject me with poison, believing it was the only thing giving me a chance to be a mother. And all this time they had been sterilizing me. My hand shook violently as I clutched my purse. Inside that small beaded bag was a folded piece of paper just this morning, driven by a nagging instinct I could not explain. I had driven 2 towns over to a walk-in clinic under a fake name. I had paid cash for a full fertility panel. The doctor there had called me an hour before the party. "Mrs. Williams," he had said, "your results are pristine. Your ovarian reserve is excellent. There is absolutely no physiological reason you cannot conceive." I had carried that paper into the party like a secret hope, confused by the discrepancy between the 2 doctors. Now the confusion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. I was not broken. I was being sabotaged. I backed away from the door, my heels silent on the carpet. I could not confront them now. Not when I was shaking. Not when they had the power, the money, and the room full of witnesses who thought I was a failure. I needed to get out. But first, I had to survive the rest of the night. I went to the nearest restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and reapplied my lipstick. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was pale, her eyes wide with shock. But beneath the fear, something new was hardening. It was the steel spine Elena claimed I lacked. I walked back into the ballroom. The speeches were over. The band was playing a slow, mournful blues number. I saw Nate near the entrance. He was not looking for me. He was standing next to Elena, who was beaming. And standing between them was a woman I recognized from the society pages. Camille Rhodes, the daughter of a steel magnate, tall, blonde, and dressed in a gown that likely cost more than my entire college education. She was everything I was not. Old money, connected, classy. I stopped 10 feet away. Elena saw me approaching. Her smile widened, not with kindness, but with triumph. "Arver," Elena called out loud enough for the nearby circle of guests to hear. "You are back. Come here. I want you to meet someone." I stepped forward, my head held high, the weight of the medical report in my purse burning against my head. "This is Camille Rhodes," Elena said, placing a possessive hand on Camille's bare shoulder. "She has just returned from Paris. Her family and ours have been friends for decades. Camille is looking to settle down in Lakewood Heights. I told her Nate would be happy to show her the ropes of the local business world." Camille smiled at me, a pitying, dismissive smile. "It is lovely to meet you, Arver. Elena has told me so much about your situation. You are so brave to keep trying." It was a setup, a public replacement. Elena was parading the successor right in front of my face, confident that the broken, barren wife would simply fade into the wallpaper. Nate finally looked at me. His eyes were glassy with alcohol and guilt. But he didn't step away from Camille. He stood there flanked by his mother and his future, leaving me alone in the cold. "Lovely to meet you too, Camille," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "Welcome to the family circus." I turned to Elena. "Happy birthday to your son. Elena, you certainly know how to throw a party." I turned and walked away. I did not run this time. I walked straight through the crowd, head up, listening to the jazz and the laughter, knowing that while they thought this was the end of Arver Carver, it was actually the beginning of something else entirely. I touched my purse one last time. I had the truth in my pocket, and as I stepped out into the biting November wind, I knew one thing for certain. I would burn their kingdom down, and I would use the very stones of their ruins to build my own. Looking back, it is terrifying how easily I mistook a cage for a castle. When you are in love, you view red flags as mere quirks and controlling behavior as protective instinct. I spent the drive home from that disastrous birthday party dissecting the last 5 years of my life, peeling back the layers of my marriage like a rotted onion, finally seeing the core of it for what it truly was. I was 27 when I met Nate. I was not a socialite or an Aries. I was a senior financial analyst at a boutique firm called Harbaline Insight Collective. I spent my days building valuation models and my nights eating takeout in a one-bedroom apartment that I paid for with my own money. I was proud of my life. I was independent. Then Nate Carver walked into a client meeting wearing a suit that cost more than my car and charmed the entire room, including me. In the beginning, he was different, or at least he played the part of being different. He was the rebellious son of the Carver dynasty, the one who rolled his eyes at his mother's pretensions. When Alina first made a comment about my quaint public school education during a dinner date, Nate had squeezed my hand under the table and told her to stop being a snob. That squeeze was all I needed. I thought it was us against the world. I thought his wealth was just background noise, not the main character in our relationship. We married 18 months later. The wedding was a blur of white, roses, and flashbulbs, orchestrated entirely by Alina. I remember feeling small on my own wedding day, but I told myself it was just nerves. I told myself that once the ceremony was over, it would just be Nate and me. I was wrong. The pressure started before the honeymoon tan had even faded. It began with the emails. Elena would forward me articles at 6:00 in the morning with subject lines like "The Modern Superwoman" or "Balancing the Boardroom and the Bassinet." They were profiles of women who ran Fortune 500 companies while raising 3 children. Then came the comments over Sunday brunch. "You are almost 30. Arver, the biological clock does not negotiate. Nate needs a legacy. A man works harder when he has a son to build for." I tried to brush it off. We were young. We had time. But the leader did not believe in time. 3 months after the wedding, she announced she had made an appointment for me with Dr. Morgan Foster. "He is the best in the state," she had said, sliding a gold-embossed business card across the marble countertop. He delivered Nate. "I trust no one else with the future of this family." When I hesitated, Nate sided with her. "Just go for a checkup, Arver," he had said, kissing my forehead. "It will make her happy, and then she will get off our backs." That was the first compromise, the first step into the trap. Dr. Foster's office looked less like a clinic and more like a high-end spa with muted beige walls and orchids on every surface. Elena came into the examination room with me. When I asked for privacy, she laughed it off, claiming she needed to understand the medical history of the grandchild she was expecting. I looked to Dr. Foster to ask her to leave, but he just smiled a tight professional smile and opened my file. "Your hormone levels are a bit irregular, Arver." Dr. Foster had told me after the first blood panel, "Nothing serious, but if you want to conceive a Carver heir within the year, we should give nature a nudge." He called them vitamin cocktails, a proprietary blend of B12, folic acid, and progesterone support. That is what he said. "They will optimize your system," he promised. "Make your body the perfect environment for a baby." I hated needles, but I loved Nate. I wanted to give him the family he talked about during our late-night whispers. So I took the shots. Every month I went to the clinic with Elena often sitting in the corner chair reading Vogue while Dr. Foster injected the vitamins into my arm. 6 months into the marriage, a miracle happened. I missed my period. The stick turned pink. I was pregnant. I remember the sheer, unadulterated joy I felt. I bought a tiny pair of booties and wrapped them in a box for Nate. We cried together in the kitchen. For a week, I felt like I had finally secured my place. I was not just the outsider wife anymore. I was the mother of his child. But when we told Elena, her reaction was chilling. She did not hug me. She did not cry. She simply looked at my stomach with a critical eye and said, "It is very early. Do not celebrate until we are out of the danger zone." The next day, she insisted I see Dr. Foster immediately. "We need to ensure the pregnancy holds," she declared, in the office. Dr. Foster looked grave. He told me my progesterone levels were fluctuating dangerously. "You need a booster shot," he said, "to lock it in. Otherwise, your body might reject the fetus." I was terrified. I would have done anything to save that baby. "Please," I said, "give it to me." He administered the injection. Elena watched, her eyes unreadable. 3 days later, I woke up in agony. The cramping was violent, tearing through me like a knife. I lost the baby on a Tuesday afternoon. I lay in the hospital bed, empty and hollowed out, while Dr. Foster stood at the foot of the bed and shook his head. It was poor uterine quality, he told Nate, loud enough for me to hear. Her body just terminated it. It happens when the host environment is not robust enough. Host environment, not a mother, a host. That was the turning point. Nate changed after the miscarriage. He threw himself into his work at Carvelux Properties. Spending 18 hours a day at the office, he stopped coming home for dinner. He stopped holding me. When I tried to talk about our loss, he would shut down, physically recoiling from my grief. Eleanor stepped into the void he left behind. She began to speak for him. Nate is devastated. You know, she would tell me over tea, her voice laced with poison. He feels guilty. He thinks perhaps he chose a wife who cannot fulfill the basic duties of marriage. That is not true, I would argue, my voice trembling. It was a miscarriage. They are common. Not in our family, she would snap back. Carver women are strong. They breed strong sons. Nate does not have a lifetime to wait for a working womb. Carver, he has a board of directors to answer to. She planted the seed in his head that I was broken, and she planted the seed in my head that I was a failure. I spent my nights wandering the empty halls of our penthouse, a sprawling glass box in the sky that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I would look at our wedding photos on the wall and wonder where that gentleman had gone. I started to believe them. Maybe I was defective. Maybe my body was simply incompatible with the greatness of the Carver bloodline. Then came the contract. It was our 3rd anniversary. Nate and I were barely speaking. Eleanor came over for dinner with a lawyer in tow. She placed a document on the dining table between the roasted chicken and the untouched wine glasses. It is a postnuptial amendment, she said casually. Just housekeeping for the company audit. I read it. It was dense legal jargon, but my time at Harboline Insight Collective meant I knew how to read a contract. One clause stuck out, glowing like neon on the page. It stated that if the marriage did not produce a viable heir within 5 years of the wedding date, any claim I had to Carver Lux shares or marital assets derived from the company would be null and void. I would leave with nothing but the personal items I brought in. Nate. I looked at him horrified. What is this? Nate refused to meet my eyes. He cut his chicken with surgical precision. It is just a formality. However, Mom says the board is nervous about the succession plan. It gets them off my back. But it says if we don't have a baby in 2 years, I get cut out completely. I said it puts a deadline on my body. We will have a baby by then. Nate said, his voice flat. So it does not matter, unless you think you can't. He looked up then, and I saw the doubt Eleanor had cultivated in his eyes. He was challenging me. If I refused to sign, it was an admission that I believed I was barren. It was an admission of failure. I can, I whispered. I know I can. Then, sign it, Ilona said, uncapping a fountain pen. Show us you are committed to this family. I signed. I signed because I loved him. I signed because I wanted to prove them wrong. I signed because I trusted that the medical treatments were trying to help me, not harm me. Now, sitting in my car 5 years later, the ink on that signature felt like a noose. I realized with sickening clarity that the timeline was never random. The injections, the vitamins, the miscarriage, it was all a coordinated demolition. Elena had bought herself an insurance policy. She had paid Dr. M. Foster to keep me sterile for 5 years, just long enough for the clock on the contract to run out. She had stolen my fertility. She had stolen my husband. And she had ensured that when she finally discarded me, she would not have to pay me a single dime of the Carver fortune. I was not just a victim of a bad marriage. I was the victim of a corporate acquisition strategy executed with surgical ruthlessness. I had walked down the aisle into a slaughterhouse and I had handed them the knife. But as I turned the ignition and wiped the mascara from my cheeks, a new thought took root. They thought they had won because they had studied the contract. They forgot that I used to analyze risk for a living. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that by breaking me, they had stripped away the only thing that was keeping me nice. I drove away from the hotel, leaving the old Arver behind in the rear-view mirror. She was a sweet girl. I would miss her, but the woman driving the car now, she was ready for war. I locked the heavy mahogany door of the powder room behind me and leaned against it, gasping for air as if I had just sprinted a mile. The marble vanity, the gold fixtures, the fresh orchids in the vase, everything blurred into a kaleidoscope of nausea. I stared at myself in the mirror. My lipstick was still perfect. My hair was still pinned in place, but the woman staring back at me looked like she was screaming behind a sheet of glass. I had a choice. I could unlock this door, walk back out there, swallow the poison, and let Alana Carver dissolve me into nothingness. Or I could stop shaking and start fighting. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. It was Lena Cruz. Lena was my lifeline. We had met in college, and while I went into finance, she had climbed the ladder in healthcare administration. She was currently the billing manager for a massive network of private clinics, a competitor to Dr. Foster's practice, but she had access to shared insurance databases that most people did not know existed. I swiped the answer. Lena, I cannot talk right now. I just heard Lena. Shut up and listen to me, Arver. Lena's voice was tight, breathless, and devoid of its usual warmth. Are you somewhere safe? I am in the bathroom at the hotel. Fine. I ran the audit you asked for, the one on Dr. Foster's external consulting fees. I thought I would find maybe a few kickbacks for pharmaceutical reps. Arver, I found transfers. My grip on the phone tightened. From whom? From a shell corporation registered to the Carver Family Trust, Lena said, her words coming out fast, like bullets. $50,000 every 6 months for the last 2 years. The memo line says, special consulting for Arver Williams. But here is the part that made me sick. I dug deeper into the shared pathology exchange. It is a system we use to track high-value biological assets across state lines. I felt the blood drain from my face. Biological assets. Your IVF cycle from 3 years ago. Lena whispered. The one Dr. Foster told you failed. The one where he said the embryos were low quality and disintegrated. Yes, I choked out. He said they were non-viable. He lied, Lena said, and I could hear the fury in her voice. The system shows 3 blastoists, 2 male, 1 female. They were not discarded. Arver, they were cryopreserved. They are sitting in a tank right now at a private storage facility paid for by Alana Carver. Status is listed as awaiting surrogate. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the sink to keep from falling. They were not dead. My babies, my potential children. They were frozen in ice, stolen from my body, waiting for Alina to decide who was worthy enough to carry them. She kept them, I whispered, the horror transforming into a cold, sharp blade in my chest. She stole my eggs, fertilized them with Nate's sperm, told me they died, and kept them for someone else. She is planning to use them with a surrogate. Arver, probably once you are out of the picture, you need to get out of there. You need a lawyer. I am not leaving yet, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Send me the screenshots. Everything you have right now. Sent. Be careful, Arver. I hung up. My phone pinged 3 times in rapid succession. I opened the images. There it was. The financial transfers, the pathology report, grade A viable. I unlocked the door. The panic was gone. In its place was a clarity so sharp it felt dangerous. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, ignoring the waiters with their trays of caviar and the guests who were now happily buzzing with alcohol. I scanned the room and found Mate. He was not with Camille anymore. He was standing alone on the private balcony overlooking the city lights, nursing a drink, looking miserable. I pushed open the glass doors. The November wind was biting, whipping the silk of my dress around my legs. Nate jumped when he saw me. Arver, he said, his voice slurring slightly. I thought you left. Look, about what Mom said. Stop, I said. I did not yell. I did not cry. I walked up to him and held up my phone. Look at this. He squinted at the screen. What is this? A spreadsheet. It is a record of your mother paying Dr. Foster $100,000 over the last 2 years to inject me with birth control instead of fertility treatments. I said, my voice steady against the wind. I swiped to the next image. And this is a record of our children. The 3 embryos Dr. Foster told us died. They are alive, Nate. Your mother has them in a freezer. Nate stared at the phone, then at me. He blinked, shaking his head, as if trying to clear a fog. "That is crazy, Arver. You are drunk. Mom would never. I have the lab results in my purse from an independent doctor confirming I am fertile." I cut in, pulling the crumpled paper from my clutch and slamming it against his chest. "I have the financial records. I heard them talking. Nate, I heard her paying him to keep me barren so you would leave me." Nate looked at the paper, then back at me. I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. For a second, just a second, I thought the man I married was going to surface. I thought he was going to throw his glass down, grab my hand, and march back inside to confront the monster who raised him. But then he looked through the glass doors. He saw his mother holding court near the cake. He saw the investors. He saw the safety of his inheritance. The fear in his eyes extinguished the spark of rebellion. "You are hysterical," Nate said, pushing the paper back at me. "You are making this up because you are hurt. Dr. Foster is a professional. Why would Mom keep embryos if she hates you to use them with a surrogate?" I hissed, "To have a Carver heir without the pollution of me raising it." "Nate, please. You have to believe me. We can leave right now. We can sue them. We can get our babies back." Nate took a step back, hitting the railing. "Stop it, Arver. You are sounding paranoid. Maybe this marriage really is too much for you. Mom was right. You are not well." My heart shattered, not into two pieces, but into dust. "I am not well. I am the only one seeing the truth. We signed a contract," Nate muttered, looking at his shoes. "5 years. If it didn't work, maybe we should just accept it. We can make it clean. A dissolution. A dissolution," I repeated. "Is that what I am to you? A business merger that failed." The glass door slid open behind us. Lena stepped out. She did not look surprised. She looked bored. She was holding a blue folder. "I told you she would make a scene, Nathaniel," Elena said, her voice cutting through the wind. She did not even look at me. She walked straight to her son and placed a hand on his arm. "She is unstable. It is the hormones, or lack thereof." She turned to me, extending the blue folder. "This was supposed to be for tomorrow morning, but since you are determined to ruin the evening, let us finish it now." I looked at the folder. "What is this?" "Divorce papers," Elena said, "drafted by the family legal team based on the postnuptial agreement you signed. You have failed to produce an heir within the 5-year window. Therefore, you are entitled to 0 equity in Carva Lux, no alimony, no settlement." She smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "However, because I am generous, there is a check in there for $50,000. Enough to rent a hideous apartment and start over. Consider it a severance package." I looked at the check. $50,000. The exact amount she paid Dr. Foster to ruin my body. The symmetry of her cruelty was breathtaking. "I am not signing this," I said, "and I am not taking your money." "You will sign it," Elena said, her voice dropping to a growl, "or I will drag this out in court until you are bankrupt. I will bury you in legal fees. I will ruin your reputation so thoroughly you will not be able to get a job as a cashier, let alone a financial analyst. A classy woman knows when to step back when she has become useless. Arver, do not make this ugly." I looked at Nate. He was studying the city skyline, refusing to witness the execution of his marriage. "You are right, Elena," I said softly. "A classy woman knows when to leave." I did not take the folder. I did not take the check. I stepped around her. "Where are you going?" Elena snapped. "We have to cut the cake. We have to maintain appearances until the press release goes out on Monday." "Go to hell," I said. She lunged forward and grabbed Nate's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Fix your tie, Nathaniel. You are going back inside and you are going to smile. Arva is leaving. She is feeling unwell." She dragged him back into the light and noise of the party. Nate went willingly, a puppet on a golden string. I stood alone on the balcony for 1 second, letting the cold wind dry the tears on my face. Then I turned and walked back inside, skirting the edge of the room toward the coat check. I needed my coat. I needed to get out before I screamed. The coat room was quiet, a small sanctuary of fur and wool. I handed my ticket to the attendant. As I waited, the door opened and Camille Rodas walked in. I stiffened, bracing myself for another insult, but Camille looked guilty. She was holding a glass of wine with both hands, her knuckles white. "Arver," she said, her voice low, "I am leaving Camille. You can have him. The throne is empty." "I did not know," she whispered, stepping closer so the attendant would not hear. "Not until tonight. Elena called my father last week. She offered to fund my fashion line, $5 million in seed capital, but the condition was that I had to attend tonight, that I had to be open to Nathaniel." I stared at her. "She is buying you. She told me you were separated," Camille said, her eyes wide. "She said it was over months ago. I did not know you were still trying. I saw the way she looked at you out there. It was cruel. It is a business transaction." "Camille," I said, taking my coat from the attendant. I wrapped it around myself like armor. "You are not your girlfriend. You are the acquisition. She needs a uterus with a good pedigree. If you marry him, she will own you just like she owned me. Run while you can." Camille flinched. She looked toward the ballroom door, then back at me. "I am sorry." "Do not be sorry," I said, clutching my purse with the evidence inside. "Be smart." I walked out of the coat room, past the grand double doors of the ballroom. Inside, the lights were dimming again. A waiter was wheeling out a massive cake with 35 candles burning bright. The crowd was singing "Happy Birthday." I could see Elena standing next to Nate, her hand on his back, her face a mask of triumphant matriarchy. Nate looked hollowed out, a paper doll in a tuxedo. They thought I was walking away defeated. They thought I was going to fade into the night. Another discard in the Carver trash heap. I touched the cold screen of my phone in my pocket. I thought of the 3 frozen lives in a tank somewhere, waiting for a mother to fight for them. I pushed through the revolving doors of the hotel and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city noise washed over me, sirens, honking cabs, the hum of life. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that did not smell of expensive lees and lies. I would not sign their papers. I would not take their money. I was going to find a lawyer who was hungry enough to take down a giant. I was going to get my babies back, and then I was going to come back for the rest of it. I hailed a taxi. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. "Riverbend," I said, naming the gritty neighborhood where rents were cheap and people mind their own business and drive fast. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the Carver Grand Hotel one last time. It glowed like a jewel box against the night sky. "Enjoy the cake, Elena. I thought it is the last sweet thing you will taste for a very long time." I traded the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline for a view of a brick wall and a rusted fire escape. My new apartment in Riverbend was a 4th-floor walk-up with radiator pipes that clanged like hammers in the middle of the night and linoleum floors that curled at the corners. It was a universe away from the penthouse at Carver Tower. For the first time in 5 years, the air I breathed felt like my own. I spent the first 3 nights on the floor of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes I had not bothered to unpack. I did not sleep. Sleep felt dangerous, a surrender I could not afford. Instead, I turned my small thrifted coffee table into a war room. I spread everything out. The postnuptial agreement Elena had bullied me into signing. The printouts of the bank transfers Lena had risked her job to send me. The medical records I had managed to download before Dr. Foster revoked my access to the portal. I looked at the pieces of my life like a forensic accountant analyzing a bankrupt company. The numbers were all there, staring back at me in black and white, telling a story of systematic dismantling. The more I looked, the more the nausea rose in my throat. It was not just cruelty, it was architecture. Elena had not just disliked me. She had designed my failure. She had calculated the exact amount of time it would take to break my spirit, the exact cost of the bribes to the doctor, and the precise legal language needed to discard me without a severance package. I was not a person to her. I was a depreciating asset that she had decided to liquidate. On the 4th morning, I showered in the lukewarm water of my tiny bathroom, dressed in the most professional clothes I had left, and drove to a clinic on the south side of the city. Dr. Amelia Rodas ran a practice that catered to working-class women. There were no orchids in the waiting room, only worn magazines and the television playing cartoons for the children running around. But when she walked into the exam room, I saw an intelligence in her eyes that Dr. May Foster's polished veneer had never possessed. She spent an hour reviewing the blood work from the independent lab and conducting a physical exam. When she finally sat down on her rolling stool, she took off her glasses and looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional rage. "Mrs. Williams," she said, her voice measured, "I have reviewed your hormone panel. Your progesterone and estrogen levels are finally starting to normalize, but the residue in your system is consistent with a high-dose long-acting injectable contraceptive, something similar to Depo-Provera, but more concentrated." I gripped the edge of the exam table until my knuckles turned white. They told me they were vitamins, vitamin cocktails, to support egg quality. Dr. Rhodes shook her head slowly. "That is medical malpractice. Plain and simple. If you were trying to conceive while on this regimen, it was physiologically impossible. In fact, if you had managed to conceive, the synthetic hormones would have almost certainly forced a miscarriage." The room went silent. I thought of the baby I lost 3 years ago, the grief that had hollowed me out, the way Nate had looked at me like I was a broken vessel. It was not nature. It was not bad luck. It was murder by prescription. And my fertility now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Did they ruin me permanently?" "No," she said firmly. "Your uterus is healthy. Your ovarian reserve is excellent for your age. Once this poison is out of your system, there is no medical reason you cannot carry a child to term. You are not barren. Arthur, you never were." I left the clinic shaking. I sat in my car in the parking lot and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed for the baby I lost. I screamed for the years I spent hating my own body. And then when the silence returned, the coldness came back. The ice that had started to form in my veins at the party was spreading now, freezing over the grief, turning it into something hard and sharp. I needed a weapon. And in America, the only weapon that matters as much as money is the law. I found Jordan Pike through a legal aid forum. He was young, hungry, and operated out of a shared office space above a bakery. He wore a suit that was slightly too large for him, and his desk was buried under stacks of case files. But when he looked at the documents Leaner had sent me, his eyes sharpened. "This is fraud," Jordan said, tapping a pen against the bank transfer records. "Clear-cut, but proving it in a way that pierces the Carver family veil. That is the hard part. They have teams of lawyers whose only job is to bury people like us." "I do not care about the money," I said. "I want the embryos." Leaner found 3 viable embryos in storage. Leaner paid for the cycle, but they are my genetic material. I want them. Jordan pulled the IVF contract from the pile. He read it in silence for 10 minutes, his brow furrowing. Then he stopped. A slow smile spread across his face. "Here," he said, pointing to a paragraph on page 12. "Standard boilerplates usually assign ownership to the payer in the event of a dispute. But Dr. Foster's office got sloppy. They used an older consent form for the medical procedure itself. Look at the signature line for patient and partner. You and Nathaniel signed here as the biological progenitors." He looked up at me. "Eleanor signed the financial responsibility agreement, but she never signed the custody waiver because legally a grandmother has no claim to the genetic material. She paid for the storage." "Yes, but she does not own the contents of the tank." "You do." "And Nate?" I asked. "Technically, it is shared property," Jordan explained. "But if we can prove that he or his agent, his mother, acted in bad faith to defraud you of your reproductive rights, a judge might grant you full custody to prevent the destruction or misuse of the embryos. It is a long shot, Arthur, but it is a shot." I had a choice to make. Jordan laid it out for me. I could sign the divorce papers Alina had thrown at me, take the $50,000 and disappear. It would be safe. I could start over or I could sue. I could fight for children that did not even exist yet against a family that could crush me with a phone call. I told him I needed a day to think. That evening, I went to a discount supermarket in Riverbend to buy groceries. I was standing in the cereal aisle debating between generic oats and the brand name I used to buy without thinking when I saw them. A woman looking exhausted was pushing a double stroller. Inside were twin toddlers, a boy and a girl, both with messy hair and sticky hands. The girl was crying over a dropped cracker, and the boy was trying to tickle her to make her stop. The mother looked frazzled. She was wearing sweatpants and a stained T-shirt. She looked nothing like the polished whites of Lakewood Heights, but then she leaned down. She kissed the girl on the forehead and whispered something that made the child giggle. She smoothed the boy's hair. The look on her face was pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a chaotic, messy, beautiful love that had nothing to do with legacies or inheritances or board seats. I stood there clutching a box of oatmeal and felt the tears hot on my cheeks. I did not want the Carver money. I did not want the penthouse. I wanted that. I wanted the sticky hands and the sleepless nights. I wanted the family that Alina had told me I was too broken to have. I realized then that my revenge could not just be destruction. Destroying them would be satisfying, yes, but to truly win, I had to build the life they said I was unworthy of. I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. I typed an email to Nathaniel. Subject: divorce agreement tight. I have thought about what your mother said. I am tired of fighting. I agreed to the dissolution of the marriage. I will have a lawyer contact your team to handle the paperwork. I do not want to see you. I do not want to speak to you. Let us just end this. I hit send. It was a lie, a calculated surrender to make them lower their shields. If they thought I was walking away, they would stop watching the storage tank. They would stop watching me. I picked up my phone and called Jordan Pike. It was 9 at night, but he answered on the second ring. File the injunction, I said. I want a court order freezing any activity regarding those embryos. I want them transferred to a neutral facility under my name. And Jordan, do it quietly. I do not want them to know we have moved until the judge hits the gavel. You're sure? Jordan asked. Once we file this, there is no going back. You are declaring war on the Carvers. I looked around my empty, silent apartment. I thought of the needles in my arm. I thought of Eleanor's smug face at the party. I thought of the twins in the grocery store. I am sure I said, they took 5 years of my life. I am going to take their future. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark. I was alone. I was broke. I was up against a titan. But for the first time in a long time, I did not feel barren. I felt pregnant with a terrible, beautiful purpose. The Arver who cried in the bathroom at the Carver Grand was gone. The woman sitting in the dark was someone else entirely, and she was just getting started. The war for my children was not fought with swords or shouting matches, but with quiet, terrifying paperwork. Jordan Pike, my lawyer with the ill-fitting suits and the brilliant legal mind, had cornered Dr. Foster's clinic. We threatened to expose the billing fraud and the manipulated medical records to the state medical board. The clinic, terrified of an investigation that would shatter their reputation, folded in less than 2 months. They terminated their contract with Elena Carver. They signed a document acknowledging that I, Arver Williams, was the sole legal custodian of the 3 viable embryos in storage. Eleanor's signature on the financial responsibility forms was deemed a gift under the law, granting her no rights to the genetic material. As for Nate, his lawyers were so eager to rush the divorce and secure his assets that they skimmed the fine print. They assumed the failed cycle note in the old file was accurate. They never asked about the frozen vials. I walked away from my marriage with nothing but my maiden name and 3 microscopic points of light frozen in liquid nitrogen. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I went to a different clinic. I went alone. There was no husband to hold my hand, no mother-in-law to critique my weight. I lay on the table, staring at the sterile white ceiling tiles, and made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I chose to transfer 2 embryos. It was a reckless decision. I was single, unemployed, and living in a walk-up apartment in Riverbend. But I also knew that those embryos were the only thing I had left that felt true. They were partially Nate, yes, but they were also me, and I would be damned if I let the Carver family extinguish my line. The pregnancy test turned positive 14 days later. I did not have the luxury of resting. I needed money, and I needed it fast. I landed an interview at Northbridge and Berline Strategies, a mid-sized consulting firm known for its aggressive restructuring tactics. I walked into the interview 8 weeks pregnant, fighting the urge to vomit into the potted plant in the lobby. Across the desk sat Dana Hart. She was a legend in the industry, a woman who wore sharp blazers and suffered no fools. She looked at my resume, then at the gap in my employment, then at me. "You have been out of the game for 5 years," Daner said, tapping a pen on the glass table. "Why should I hire you over a kid fresh out of Harvard who will work 80 hours a week for half your salary? Because the kid from Harvard thinks business is about spreadsheets," I said, leaning forward. "I know that business is about people hiding things. I can find the rot in a company because I know exactly what it looks like when someone is lying to you about the numbers." Daner stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. "Welcome to the team, Williams. Try not to cry in the bathroom. The acoustics are terrible. My pregnancy was a battle. I was carrying twins, and my body let me know it every single day. I spent my mornings heating into the toilet before putting on a tailored suit that became increasingly tight. I sat through 4-hour strategy meetings with a backhatch that felt like a hot iron rod was jammed into my spine. I hid it for as long as I could. In corporate America, being a woman is hard. Being a pregnant woman is a liability. Being a single pregnant woman is viewed as a career suicide note. When I finally started showing, the whispers began. I saw the eyes of my male colleagues drift to my ringless hand, then to my belly. They assumed I was messy. They assumed I was distracted. Daner Hart was the only one who did not flinch. When I told her, she just nodded. "Can you still do the job?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Then I do not care if you are carrying a litter of puppies," she said. "Just do not ask for special treatment. Walk into every room like you own the building, not like you are apologizing for taking up space." I took that advice to heart. I worked harder than anyone. I analyzed balance sheets until 3 in the morning. I found millions of dollars in wasted operational costs for our clients. I turned my pregnancy insomnia into billable hours. Leo and Meyer arrived on a stormy Tuesday in late August. I drove myself to the hospital when the contractions hit 5 minutes apart. The labor was 18 hours of blinding pain, but when the doctor finally placed them on my chest, the world stopped. Leo was first, screaming with a set of lungs that demanded to be heard. Meyer followed 2 minutes later, quiet and observant, her eyes wide open. They were tiny, fragile, and absolutely perfect. I looked at their faces and saw traces of Nate, the shape of the nose, the curve of the chin, but when they looked at me, they were all mine. When the nurse brought the birth certificate forms, I picked up the pen with a shaking hand. Under Mother, I wrote Arthur Williams. Under Father, I left a blank line. It was the most powerful silence of my life. I was not denying their heritage. I was protecting their future. The first year was a blur of exhaustion that I would not wish on my worst enemy. I was a zombie in yoga pants. There were nights when both babies were crying. The apartment was a mess, and I sat on the kitchen floor weeping because I was so tired my bones hurt. I learned to pump breast milk in airport bathroom stalls between client meetings. I learned to function on 3 hours of sleep. I learned that loneliness is a physical weight, heavy and cold, that sits on your chest when the rest of the world is asleep. But there was also joy. The smell of their heads after a bath, the way Leo would grab my finger with his entire fist. The first time Meyer smiled at me, a gummy lopsided grin that made every struggle worth it. I could not have survived without Marcus. Marcus O'Neill lived in 4B down the hall. He was a software engineer with messy hair, a collection of vintage Star Wars t-shirts, and a heart the size of the Midwest. He started by helping me carry the double stroller up the stairs. Then he started fixing the leaky faucet I could not afford to call a plumber for. One evening when the twins were 6 months old, I was drowning. I had a major presentation due from Northbridge. Meyer had a fever, and I had burned dinner. I was standing in the kitchen, smoke alarm beeping, trying to rock a screaming baby while scraping burnt toast. Marcus knocked on the open door. He took one look at me, stepped inside, and gently took the spatula from my hand. "Go sit down," he said. "I can't," I stammered. "The presentation, the smoke. Meyer is hot." "I have got Meyer," he said, scooping her up with a natural ease that made me want to cry. "I will order pizza. You go type your report." And Arthur breathed. He became my village. He was the one who held them when they got their shots. He was the one who brought me coffee when I was pulling all-nighters. We fell into a rhythm that was domestic and intimate. Yet I kept a wall up. I saw the way he looked at me sometimes with a softness that terrified me. I was not ready to be looked at like that. I was still rebuilding the ruins of my self-esteem, and I could not let anyone else in. Not yet. At work, I was soaring. Dana Hart mentored me with a brutal kind of love. She taught me how to negotiate without blinking. She taught me that silence is a power move. Stop trying to be liked, Arver. She told me after I apologized for interrupting a male colleague. Be necessary if you are necessary. They have to listen to you whether they like you or not. It became necessary. I became the Grim Reaper of North Bridge in Berlin. Companies called me when they were bleeding cash and didn't know why. I would walk in, audit their skeletons, and tell them exactly which limbs to cut to save the body. I was ruthless because I had to be. I was fighting for Leo and Meyer's college funds. I was fighting for the house with a yard I promised them. By the time the twins were nearly 3, we had moved out of the walk-up and into a modest but lovely townhouse in a good school district. I had a nanny, Mrs. Higgins, who adored the kids. I had a corner office. I had respect, but I never forgot. I kept a digital folder on my encrypted laptop. Every time Carver Lux made the news, I saved it. I watched from a distance as Nate took over as CEO. I watched as Alina was praised in society magazines for her philanthropy. They looked happy. They looked untouched. Then came Tuesday morning. That changed everything. I was in the kitchen packing lunches for the twins' preschool. Lee was trying to feed his oatmeal to the dog, and Meyer was singing a song about a purple frog. The television was on in the background, tuned to the financial news channel. Breaking news. The anchor said, "Trouble at Carver Properties." I froze a juice box halfway to the lunchbox. Shares of the real estate giant dipped 5% this morning following rumors of a liquidity crisis, the reporter continued. Analysts suggest the company is over-leveraged on several high-profile commercial developments that have failed to attract tenants. CEO Nathaniel Carver has declined to comment. I walked over to the television and turned up the volume. There was a shot of Carver Tower, the building where I used to live, the building where I was told I was worthless. Sources say the company is seeking a bridge loan to cover operational costs, the reporter added. But with interest rates rising, their options are limited. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not the smile of a mother or a friend. It was the smile of a predator who had just caught the scent of blood on the wind. They were vulnerable. They were over-leveraged. They were desperate for cash. I picked up my phone and dialed Dana Hart. "I have a target for the distress fund," I said, my voice steady. Dana asked, sensing the shift in my tone. I looked at Leo and Meyer, who were laughing as the dog licked the oatmeal off the floor. "My beautiful secret Carver children." "Carver Lux," I said, "and I know exactly where the bodies are buried." The years of survival were over. The years of the hunt had just begun. The file landed on my desk on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was a thick-bound dossier from a distressed debt fund that Northbridge in Berlin was advising. They wanted a risk assessment on a portfolio of corporate bonds they were holding, specifically looking for volatility. I flipped it open, and there staring up at me from the third page was the name Carvelux Properties. My heart did not race, my hands did not shake. Instead, a calm glacial focus settled over me. It was the feeling a surgeon must get when they pick up the scalpel the moment when emotion is suspended and only technique remains. I spent the next 48 hours dissecting the Carver Lux financials. To the outside world, and even to their lower-level shareholders, the company looked like a titan. They had ribbon-cutting ceremonies every other month. They had Nate's face on the cover of industry magazines. They had a Lillener's charitable foundation throwing gallows, but I was not looking at the glossy brochures. I was looking at the debt covenants. What I found was a house of cards built on a fault line. Carvelux was drowning. They had been aggressively expanding into luxury commercial retail spaces just as the market was shifting toward e-commerce to fund B's vanity projects. Projects I knew were driven by a Lillener's desire to have the Carver name on every corner of the city. They had taken on massive amounts of short-term debt. They were using a revolving credit line to pay off the interest on their long-term bonds. In financial terms, this is called a death spiral. In layman's terms, is like using one credit card to pay the minimum balance on another, while buying a yacht you cannot afford. They were hiding the cash flow problems behind projected future earnings and asset revaluations that were optimistic at best and fraudulent at worst. All it would take was one bad quarter, or one aggressive creditor demanding repayment, and the whole empire would collapse. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the city lights reflecting in the glass of my corner office. I was no longer the crying girl in the bathroom. I was a senior strategy officer, and I held the blueprint of their destruction in my hand. I walked into the partner meeting the next morning with a plan. The portfolio is toxic, I told the room, projecting the Carver Lux balance sheet onto the screen. Specifically, the Carver Lux exposure. Their debt-to-equity ratio is terrifying. They are bleeding cash in their hospitality division, and their new waterfront development is 6 months behind schedule and 40% over budget. So we advised the client to sell the bonds. A junior associate asked. No, I said, smoothing my skirt. If they sell now, they take a loss. The market is already jittery. I propose a different strategy. We advise the client to double down, but with conditions. We formed a consortium to offer Carvelux a restructuring package. We give them the liquidity they need to survive the next 2 quarters. Daner Hart raised an eyebrow. Why save them? Williams, I thought you liked to cut the dead wood. We are not saving them, I corrected, tapping the laser pointer on the equity column. We are buying them. The capital injection comes with strict covenants. We demand convertible notes. If they miss a single performance metric, and the debt converts to equity. We also demand 3 seats on the board of directors and veto power over all executive compensation and new capital expenditures. The room was silent. It was a hostile takeover disguised as a life raft. They will never agree to that. The associate said the Carvers are notoriously protective of their voting rights. They have $50 million in short-term notes maturing in 3 months. I said, reciting the number I had memorized. They do not have the cash to pay for it. It is either take our deal or face immediate insolvency. They will sign. Daner looked at me for a long moment. She saw the sharpness in my smile. Draft the proposal, but keep the lead negotiator anonymous for now. We do not want to spook them with names until the term sheet is ready. That was the first stroke of luck. The paperwork went out under the North Bridge and Berlin letterhead, signed only by the investment committee. When a specific contact was needed, I used my professional signature, a Williams to Nate and a Leaner. A Williams could be an Anthony, an Arthur, or an Andrew. It was a common name. They were too arrogant to imagine that they stood for the woman they had discarded. While the legal team drafted the documents, I made a personal move. I opened my private brokerage account. It was not a fortune, but 5 years of aggressive saving and performance bonuses had given me a decent war chest. I began buying Carvelux stock. I did not buy enough to trigger an SEC filing requirement, but I bought steadily. The stock price was depressed because rumors of the debt were leaking. I was buying on the dip. It was a gamble. If my plan failed, I would lose money, but I was betting on myself. I knew that once I took control and trimmed the fat, the stock would rebound. I was not just going to break them. I was going to profit from their incompetence. Then a complication arose. A week later, industry chatter reached us that Sterling Meridian Developments was sniffing around Carver Lux. Sterling Meridian was a shark in the water, a massive conglomerate that specialized in buying distressed assets, stripping them for parts, and selling the land. If they launched a hostile bid, they could blow my restructuring plan out of the water. I requested a private meeting with the CEO of Sterling Meridian, a man named Robert Thorne. We met in a dimly lit steakhouse in downtown Chicago. Thorne was old-school silver hair, pinstriped suit, cutting his steak like he was dissecting a competitor. North BR Bridge is getting in my way. MS. Williams. Thorne grunted. We want the Carver waterfront entitlements. We do not care about the brand. I know, I said, sipping my sparkling water. And you can have them eventually. He paused. I am listening. If you launch a hostile bid now, Elena Carver will scorch the earth, I explained. She will tie you up in litigation for years. She will poison the public opinion. It will cost you millions in legal fees. I leaned forward. Let Northbridge handle the takeover. We are going in through the side door debt restructuring. We will secure the board seats. We will force the leadership change. Once we are in control, we will spin off the waterfront assets to Sterling Meridian at a fair market value. You get the land without the war. We get the company and the management fees. Thorne studied me. He was looking for the catch. Why cut us in? You could keep it all. I do not want the dirt, I said simply. I want governance. I want the structure. You want the real estate. Our interests align. He extended a hand. Deal. But if you fail to get those board seats, I am coming in with a wrecking ball. I won't fail, I said. The pieces were moving into place. But I had one ethical hurdle left. I could not risk the deal blowing up if my conflict of interest was discovered later. I had to tell Dare. I walked into her office late one Friday evening. She was pouring a glass of scotch. Daner, I said, closing the door, there is something you need to know about the Carvolux deal. She turned glass in hand. I figured you would come clean eventually. I blinked. You knew. I did a background check on you the day I hired you. Arthur Daner said dryly. I know you were married to Nathaniel Carver. I know about the messy divorce. I know about the twins. She took a sip of her drink. The only reason I let you run this deal is because you are the best analyst I have. But now I have to ask you a question, and I need an honest answer. Do you want revenge or do you want to win? What is the difference? I asked. Revenge is emotional, Daner said. Revenge is messy. Revenge is walking into a room and screaming at your ex-mother-in-law and losing your leverage because you look crazy. Winning is calculated. Winning is walking away with the company, the assets, and the reputation. While they are left wondering what hit them, if you are doing this to hurt them, I will pull you off the case. If you are doing this to make Northbridge, Emberline, and yourself a lot of money, you stay. I thought about Eleanor calling me Baron. I thought about Nate's silence. Then I thought about the spreadsheet I had built, the beautiful logical trap I had set. I want to win, I said. The fact that it hurts them is just a bonus. Daner smiled. Good answer. Now, let us review the target list. We sat down and went through the Carvolux project list. I knew exactly where to strike. This resort in Aspen, I said, pointing to a line item that was bleeding cash. This is Eleanor's pet project. She picked the architects. She picked the interior designers. She flies there on the company jet every month. It is losing $3 million a quarter. It goes, Daner said, striking it through with a red pen. And this tech incubator in Silicon Valley, I continued. This is Nate's attempt to look like a visionary. He invested $20 million of company money into startups that have produced zero revenue. He calls it his legacy fund. It goes, Daner said, we systematically dismantled their dreams, converting them into red ink that needed to be erased. It was surgical. It was cold. It was perfect. We need a date, Daner said, looking at the calendar. When do we present the ultimatum? When do we force the vote? I looked at the date. November was approaching. November 15th, I said. Daner checked her calendar. That is a Saturday. Why a Saturday? Because, I said, a dark satisfaction curling in my stomach. That is the night of the Carvolux annual investor gala. It is also Nathaniel's 40th birthday. Elena is planning a massive black tie event at the Carver Grand to reassure the market. She wants to show off her son as the future of the industry. It is high drama, Arthur, Daner warned. We usually do this in a boardroom on a Monday morning. If we do it on Monday, they have the weekend to scramble, I argued. If we hit them at the gala, in front of their biggest investors, in front of the press, they will have nowhere to hide. We present the restructuring plan as the big announcement of the night. We frame it as a partnership. Elena will be forced to smile and sign the memorandum of understanding right there or risk a public stock sell-off the next morning. Daner tapped her pen against her chin. She liked it. I could tell she liked it. It was aggressive. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move that made Northbridge famous. All right, Daner said. Happy birthday, Nate. Let us get the paperwork ready. I walked out of the office and into the cool night air. I checked my phone. I had a message from the nanny. a picture of Leo and Meyer sleeping tangled together in a pile of blankets. I texted back, "Home soon. Love you." I was not just a mother anymore. I was not just an analyst. I was the architect of a collapse. Nate and Alina were planning a party to celebrate 40 years of his life. I was planning a party to celebrate the end of his empire. And the best part was I had already RSVP'd. The weeks leading up to the Garler felt less like business strategy and more like the synchronized ticking of a bomb I had personally wired. I had turned the spare bedroom of my townhouse into a command center. 3 monitors hummed on my desk, casting a blue glow over the walls. I had painted a soft yellow for the twins. The contrast was fitting: domestic peace on the perimeter, corporate warfare in the center. I watched the Carver Lux public relations machine spin into overdrive. It was a masterclass in deception. Every morning, a new article popped up on my news feed. Nathaniel Carver, the bold heir, redefining the skyline. Elena Carver on philanthropy and legacy. There was a photo of them in Town and Country magazine, standing on the balcony of the penthouse I used to clean. Elena looked imperious in velvet, her hand resting on Nate's forearm. Nate looked the part of the brooding visionary, staring off into the middle distance. They looked invincible. They looked like people who slept soundly at night, but I knew where to look for the cracks. Through my network of analysts and the whispers in the North Bridge breakroom, I pieced together the reality of Nate's second marriage. It was a disaster. Camille Rodas had effectively moved to New York City 6 months ago, launching a boutique fashion line that was burning through cash, Carver cash. Presumably, her social media was a curated feed of solo trips to the Hamptons and vague, passive-aggressive quotes about men who never leave the nest. I remembered the look on her face in the coat room 5 years ago. I had warned her. She had sold her freedom for seed capital, and now she was realizing the interest rates on a deal with Elena Carver were unbearable. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry and listening to a popular business podcast, Nate's voice filled the room. I froze, a tiny sock in my hand. "Leadership is about making hard choices," Nate was saying to the host. He sounded smoother than he used to rehearse. "You have had some personal turbulence too, haven't you?" The host asked gently. "A divorce a few years back." "Yes," Nate sighed. The sound was performative. It was tragic. "Really. My first wife struggled with significant health issues. The pressure of building a family was too much for her constitution. We realized that our paths just were not compatible. I wish her well wherever she is." I dropped the sock. Health issues, constitution. He was still doing it. 5 years later, he was still rewriting history to protect his ego, painting me as the frail, broken woman who couldn't handle the pressure. He did not mention the injections. He did not mention the fraud. He did not mention the 2 children he had unknowingly fathered, who were currently in the living room building a fortress out of sofa cushions. I turned off the podcast. The anger did not make me shake anymore. It just made me focus. I went to my computer and opened the file labeled Garler Presentation. I adjusted the font size on the slide that showed their debt maturity schedule. I wanted to make sure the people in the back row could see exactly how much red ink was bleeding out of his bold legacy. "Mommy." I spun around. Leo was standing in the doorway holding a plastic dinosaur. He was 4, turning 5, with hair that refused to lay flat, just like Nate's used to be, and eyes that were entirely mine. "Hey, buddy," I said, softening my voice instantly. "What is up? Is the fort falling down?" "Meyer says the dinosaur cannot live in the fort because he is too big," Leo said. Then he looked at the screens on my desk. "Are you working on the big party?" "Yes," I said, picking him up and setting him on my lap. "Mummy is getting ready for a very important meeting. Is Daddy going to be there?" The question hit me like a physical blow. They had started asking about Daddy 6 months ago. They saw other kids at preschool being picked up by fathers. They saw fathers in cartoons. I took a deep breath. I had rehearsed this. I had promised myself I would never poison them, no matter how much poison was in my own veins. "The man who helped make you might be there," I said carefully, smoothing his hair. "But remember what we talked about. He did not know how to be a daddy. Being a daddy takes a lot of practice. like learning to ride a bike, and he was not ready to learn. Because he was busy, Leo asked. Because he was confused about what was important. I said, but I knew what was important. You and Meyer. Leo seemed satisfied with this. He hopped off my lap. Okay, I am going to tell Meyer the dinosaur stays. He ran off. I watched him go, my heart aching in a way that had nothing to do with business. I was about to blow up their biological father's world. Someday they will read about this. Someday they might hate me for it. But I had to believe that protecting their future was worth the risk of their judgment. The logistics of the heist required a team. I could not be in two places at once. 2 nights before the garler, Marcus came over. He brought a toolbox to fix a loose hinge on the pantry door, but we both knew he was really there to check on me. He found me sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by printed legal briefs, looking manic. You look like you're planning to invade a small country, Marcus said, tightening a screw on the door frame. Just a medium-sized real estate empire, I muttered, highlighting a clause in the hostile takeover statute. Marcus put his screwdriver down and sat on the coffee table. He looked at me with those kind, steady eyes that saw too much. I am watching the kids Saturday night, he stated. It was not a question. I have Mrs. Higgins, I said. Mrs. Higgins falls asleep at 8:00. Marcus said, you are going to be late and you are going to be wired when you get home. You need someone here who can handle a crisis if one of them wakes up with a nightmare. I am staying. I looked at him. Marcus O'Neill, the man who had seen me vomit from morning sickness, who had seen me weep over bills, who had cheered when I got my first promotion. Thank you, I whispered. Arver, he said quietly. I do not know the details. I do not want to know. But I know you. You are a good mother. You are a good person. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Whatever you are planning to do in that ballroom, just make sure it is justice, not just cruelty. Do not do anything that would make Leo and Meyer ashamed to say you are their mother. I held his gaze. They tried to erase me. Marcus, they tried to erase the kids before they were even born. I know, he said. So go remind them who you are. Just do not lose yourself in the process. The invitation arrived the next morning. It came by courier to the North Bridge in Berlin offices. It was heavy cream-colored cardstock with bold leaf lettering. The board of directors of Carver Lux Properties cordially invites a representative of Northbridge and Berlin Strategies to the 40th birthday gala of Nathaniel Carver, and they're printed in elegant calligraphy at the bottom, guest of honor A. Williams, chief restructuring officer. I stared at the name A. Williams. It was the ultimate testament to their arrogance. They had seen the name on the term sheets for weeks. They had negotiated with A. Williams via email, and not once, not a single time, had it occurred to Alina or Nate that the Williams dismantling their company might be the girl they threw away. To them, Williams was just a common name, like Smith or Jones. I was so insignificant in their memory that I did not even register as a threat. Their blindness was my greatest advantage. I spent the final 24 hours in a state of hyper-focused preparation. I did not just prepare a presentation. I prepared a performance. I went to my closet and pulled out the suit I had commissioned weeks ago. It was not a dress. I was not going there as a wife or a socialite. I was going as an executive. It was a white silk tuxedo suit tailored to within an inch of its life. Sharp shoulders, a plunging neckline that was severe rather than revealing. It was power distilled into fabric. It was the kind of outfit that said, I am not here to decorate the room. I am here to buy the building. I loaded the flash drive with 3 versions of the presentation. Just in case of technical failure, I packed the hard copies of the debt for equity swap agreement, already signed by the creditor committee. I packed the affidavit from the bank proving Carver Lux was in default. And then the universe handed me the final weapon. It was Friday afternoon. I was scrolling through the local news on my phone while waiting for a file to download. A headline caught my eye. State Medical Board suspends license of prominent fertility specialist. I clicked the link, my breath hitching. Dr. Morgan Foster. The article detailed a stinging investigation into billing irregularities and unethical treatment protocols tailored to third-party payers rather than patient welfare. It did not mention the Carvers by name, not yet, but it mentioned a wealthy Lakewood Heights family that had been a primary benefactor of the clinic. I let out a laugh that sounded a little jagged. It was perfect. It was cosmic alignment. The foundation of their lies was crumbling at the exact moment I was bringing the wrecking ball for the roof. I printed the article. I made 10 copies. I slid them into the back of my leather portfolio. That night, after Marcus had left and the house was quiet, I went into the twins' room. The nightlight cast a soft glow over their beds. Leo was sprawled out, one arm hanging off the mattress. Maya was curled in a tight ball, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I stood between their beds for a long time. I listened to the rhythm of their breathing. This was the only thing that mattered. The money, the company, the revenge. It was all just a wall I was building to keep them safe. I knelt beside Maya's bed and brushed a stray curl off her forehead. She stirred but did not wake. Tomorrow, I whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow, Mommy is going to fix everything. I am going to take back what they stole. Not just for me, for you. I stood up and walked to the door. I looked back at them one last time. The Arver who had walked out of the Carver Grand 5 years ago had been broken, crying, and alone. The Arver who was walking back in tomorrow was a mother, a shark, and the CEO of their nightmares. I went to my room, hung the white suit on the outside of the closet door, and set my alarm for 6:00 in the morning. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, I did not dream of the past. I dreamed of the look on Alina Carver's face when the lights went up. The valet opened the door of the black sedan, and the cold November air rushed in to meet me. It smelled exactly the same as it had 5 years ago. Expensive cologne, exhaust fumes, and the crisp scent of falling leaves. But as I stepped out onto the red carpet of the Carver Grand Hotel, I knew the woman breathing it in was entirely new. 5 years ago, I had skewered out of these doors in a dress I could barely afford, crying into a clutch purse that held the shattered pieces of my dignity. Tonight, I stood tall in a white silk tuxedo suit that cost more than my first car. My hair was swept back in a severe architectural bun. My lips were painted a deep crimson. I did not look like a wife. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a reckoning. I handed the keys to the valet and walked toward the revolving doors. The lobby was already teeming with Lakewood Heights elite. The hum of conversation was a low roar, punctuated by the clinking of crystal. As I entered, the noise didn't stop, but it shifted. A ripple of silence started near the door and spread outward like a stone dropped in a pond. I felt the eyes. I heard the whispers. Is that it? Cannot be. Is that Avinate's ex? I did not look down. I did not adjust my jacket. I walked straight through the center of the lobby, my heels clicking the steady rhythm on the marble floor. I caught the eye of Mrs. Halloway, the woman who had asked about my nursery plans 5 years ago. Her jaw actually dropped. I offered her a cool, tight smile, the kind a shark gives before it decides if you are worth eating. Nate was standing near the entrance to the ballroom, greeting a senator. He looked older. The last 5 years had etched lines around his eyes and softened the sharpness of his jaw. He was laughing at something the senator said, but the sound was hollow. When he turned and saw me, the laugh died in his throat. He froze, his hand halfway extended for a handshake that never happened. He blinked rapidly as if trying to adjust a camera lens that refused to focus. Standing a few feet behind him was Camille. She looked exhausted. Her designer gown hung loosely on her frame, and she was clutching a glass of Pinot Grigio like it was a life preserver. She saw me, and her expression shifted from boredom to shock, and then to something that looked heartbreakingly like envy. She looked at my suit, my posture, my freedom, and she raised her glass in a tiny, almost imperceptible salute. And then there was Alina. She emerged from the crowd like a queen bee, sensing a disturbance in the hive. She was wearing gold lame shimmering under the chandeliers. She looked exactly the same, impeccable, terrifying, and utterly devoid of warmth. She scanned me from head to toe, her eyes narrowing as she processed the change. She did not like what she saw. She preferred me to be broken. Arver, she purred, gliding forward to intercept me before I could reach the ballroom doors. She extended a hand, limp and cold. What a surprise. We were not expecting you. Good evening, Elena, I said. My voice was lower than she remembered, steadier. "It is a big night. 40 is a milestone." "It is," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice so only I could hear. "I must say, you look healthy, rested. It is so good to see you have finally moved past that obsession with family. Some women just aren't built for it. Dear, it is better to accept one's limitations and find a hobby. Is this suit part of a new career, real estate? Perhaps." The barb was sharp, aimed precisely at the scar she thought was still there. She wanted to remind me that I was barren. She wanted to see me flinch. I did not flinch. I let her words hang in the air for a second, letting them wither and die against my armor. "Actually, Eleanor," I said, loud enough for Nate to hear as he walked over, "I am here representing Northbridge and Berline Strategies, the firm you have been negotiating with for the last 3 weeks regarding your Salvini crisis." Eleanor's smile faltered. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed her face. "Northbridge, but we are meeting with their chief restructuring officer tonight, Mr. Williams." Williams, I corrected. Arthur Williams. The silence that fell between the three of us was absolute. Nate looked from me to his mother, his face draining of color. Eleanor looked at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. "We have a private room reserved for the pre-parlor briefing," I said, checking my watch. "Shall we?" "My team has prepared the term sheet. We are on a tight schedule." I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the executive conference room down the hall, knowing they would follow. They had no choice. Inside the conference room, the air was sterile and cold. I took a seat at the head of the mahogany table. Eleanor sat to my right, Nate to my left. They looked like naughty school children called to the principal's office, not the titans of industry they pretended to be. I wasted no time on pleasantries. I opened my portfolio and slid 3 bound copies of the restructuring proposal across the table. "As you know," I began, my tone clipped and professional, "Carver Lux is currently facing a liquidity gap of $50 million. Your short-term notes mature on Tuesday based on your current cash flow statements. You cannot pay them." Eleanor bristled. She hated being told facts she could not manipulate. "It is a temporary cash flow issue. Arthur, we have assets. The waterfront project alone is worth $200 million. The waterfront project is a hole in the ground that is 40% over budget and mired in zoning lawsuits." I countered, not even looking up from my notes. "It is liquid. You cannot pay bondholders with dirt." I tapped the document. "Northbridge and Berline is prepared to offer a bridge loan of $60 million. This will cover the maturing notes and provide operating capital for the next 2 quarters. "And the terms?" Nate asked. His voice was quiet. He was staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He had never seen me like this. He only knew Arthur, who baked cookies and cried over negative pregnancy tests. He had no idea he had been married to a shark. "We convert the debt to equity," I said, "if you fail to meet specific performance benchmarks which we have outlined in Appendix B. Northbridge assumes majority control of the voting shares. Furthermore, we require 3 seats on the board of directors effective immediately." "Absolutely not." Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. The gold bracelets on her wrist jangled. "I am the chairman of the board. I will not cede control of my husband's company to a firm of vultures, and certainly not to you." She stood up, her face flushing red. "This is ridiculous. You are trying to humiliate us. We will find money elsewhere. Sterling Meridian has been calling." "Sterling Meridian wants to buy you for parts," I said calmly. "They will liquidate the brand and fire your entire executive team. We are offering you a chance to survive." "I will not sign this," Eleanor hissed. "We will go to the bank on Monday." "You cannot go to the banks," I said softly. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the final document. It was a single sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the Federal Reserve Bank. "This is a notice of technical default," I said, sliding it toward Nate. "You violated your debt covenants 14 days ago when your debt-to-EBIT ratio crossed 5.0. Technically, your existing lenders can call in the full amount of the loans tomorrow morning. They haven't done it yet because Northbridge asked them to hold off. We bought your debt. Eleanor, we are not just your advisors. We are your creditors." Nate picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read it, then looked at his mother. "Mom," he whispered, "it is true. We are in default. If they call the loans, we are bankrupt tonight." Alina stared at the paper. For the first time in 5 years, I saw fear in her eyes. Real naked fear. The fear of losing the only thing she actually loved, her status. "You planned this," she whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. "You orchestrated this." I analyzed the market. I said, my face a mask of professional indifference. I saw an opportunity. "It is just business." "Elena, isn't that what you told me when you handed me divorce papers on my husband's birthday? That classy woman knows when to cut her losses." I uncapped a fountain pen and placed it on top of the agreement. "Sign the memorandum of understanding." I said, "It guarantees the funding. It keeps the lights on. It lets you walk out onto that stage tonight and pretend you are still the queen of Lakewood Heights. If you do not sign, I will make a phone call, and by the time you cut the cake, the news of your insolvency will be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal." The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Nate looked at me. "Arver," he said, and there was a pleading note in his voice. "Please, why are you doing this?" "I am doing my job." "Nathaniel," I said, "are you going to do yours?" He looked at his mother. Alelima looked at the pen. She looked trapped. She realized she had underestimated the barren girl from the suburbs. She thought I was weak. She forgot that nothing is stronger than a woman who has rebuilt herself from the ashes. Slowly, with a hand that trembled with rage, Alelina picked up the pen. "This is not over," she muttered. "I will sign, but once we have the liquidity, I will buy you out. I will remove you from the board." "You can try," I said. She signed. The scratch of the pen against the paper was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Nate signed next, looking defeated. I took the papers and slid them back into my portfolio. "Excellent," I said, standing up. "The funds will be wired Monday morning. Enjoy your party. I believe you have a speech to give." I walked to the door. "Arver," Nate called out. I stopped, my hand on the handle. "You look incredible," he said. I looked back at him. He was a small man in a big suit trapped in a room with a mother who would consume him whole if he let her. "I know," I said. I walked out into the hallway. I checked my phone. I had a text from Marcus. "Kids are asleep. The fort is secure. Give them hell." I smiled. Elena had signed the bridge loan. She thought she had bought herself time. She thought she could outmaneuver me once the cash was in the bank. She had no idea that the document she just signed was not a lifeline. It was a Trojan horse. I adjusted my jacket and walked toward the ballroom. The real show was about to begin. The spotlight hit Helena Carver like a physical blessing. She stood at the Lusake podium, bathing in the adoration of 500 of Chicago's wealthiest citizens. To her right, Nate stood stiffly in his tuxedo, the forced smile on his face looking more like a grimace of pain. I watched from the wings of the stage, hidden by the heavy velvet curtain. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was a drumbeat of war. Tonight is not just about celebration. Eleanor's voice boomed through the speakers, rich and practiced. It is about legacy. My son Nathaniel has spent the last 5 years steering Carver Lux into a new era of prosperity. He has shown the kind of resilience that is rare in men of his generation. She paused for effect, taking a sip of water. "We have weathered storms," she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. "We have made difficult choices. We have pruned the dead branches that threatened to weigh down the family tree." I felt the insult land. Dead branches. But a gardener knows that you must cut away the rot to let the blossoms thrive, Elena said, beaming at Nate. "And now we are ready to bloom. We have secured a magnificent new partnership that will propel our waterfront projects to completion. I am thrilled to introduce the representative of our new strategic partners, Northbridge and Berline Strategies." She gestured grandly to the side of the stage. "Please welcome their Chief Restructuring Officer, A. Willings." This was it. I stepped out of the shadows. The click of my heels on the hardwood stage was amplified by the silence that fell over the room. I walked into the blinding white light, my chin high, the white silk soup glowing against the dark backdrop. I stopped at the podium. Elena turned to greet me, her smile fixed in place. Then she saw my face. The smile did not just fade. It disintegrated. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the audience, then back at me as if hoping I was a hallucination induced by the champagne. "Arver," she whispered, the microphone picking up the tremble in her voice. A ripple went through the crowd. I saw heads turning. I heard the collective intake of breath. "Oh my God," someone in the front row whispered. "Is that the ex-wife?" Nate took a step back, looking as if he had been punched in the gut. Camille, standing near the edge of the stage, covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. I stepped up to the microphone, gently moving Elena aside. She was too stunned to resist. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Thank you for the introduction, Elena. It is a pleasure to be here to discuss the future of Carver Lux." Elena recovered her composure, though her face was pale. She laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Well," she said, leaning into her own microphone, "this is a surprise. I did not realize Northbridge sent former family members to handle their accounts. It is quite quaint. Really, Arver, dear, are you sure you are in the right place? The catering entrance is in the back." The crowd tittered nervously. She was trying to frame me as the help as a mistake. I did not smile. I did not look at her. I looked directly at the investors in the room. "I am not here to cater the party, Elena," I said, hitting the button on the clicker in my hand. "I am here to audit it." The massive screen behind us, which had been displaying a photo of Nate as a toddler, flickered and changed. A spreadsheet appeared. It was stark, brutal, and filled with red ink. "This is the Carver Lux balance sheet as of 9/00 this morning," I announced. The gasps were audible this time. "For the last 4 quarters, you have been told that the waterfront development is 80% funded," I said, using the laser pointer to circle a column. "The truth is it is 40% funded, and the construction loans are in technical default. You have been told that the hospitality division is generating 12% profit margins. In reality, it is losing $3 million a month. Stop this," Elena hissed, reaching for the clicker. "Security, get her off the stage." "I would not do that," I said, my voice cutting through her panic. "Because if you remove me, the bridge loan you signed 20 minutes ago becomes void, and the bank seizes this hotel by midnight." Elena froze. I clicked to the next slide. It showed a graph of Carver Lux's debt maturity. It looked like a cliff. "The company is insolvent," I said to the room. "The dividends you received last quarter, they were paid using high-interest short-term debt. It was a Ponzi scheme structure designed to keep the stock price inflated while the foundation rotted." Nate stepped forward. "Arver, please. You are ruining us." "I am not ruining you, Nate," I said, turning to him. "Math is ruining you. I am just reading the numbers." I turned back to the crowd. "However, Northbridge and Berline specializes in saving distressed assets. We believe there is value here if the cancer is removed." I clicked to the final slide. It was a legal document, a capitalization table. "This morning," I said, my voice ringing out, "Northbridge and Berline executed a debt-for-equity swap with the majority of Carver Lux's bondholders, combined with the convertible note signed by Mrs. Carver and Mr. Carver. This evening, the ownership structure of this company has changed." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. "As of 5 minutes ago, Northbridge and Berline Strategies owns 51% of the voting shares of Carver Lux Properties. We are now the controlling shareholder." The room erupted. People were standing up. Journalists were shouting questions. Flashbulbs were going off like strobe lights. "That is a lie," Elena screamed. She grabbed the microphone stand, her knuckles white. "I am the chairman. I own this family. You cannot come in here and steal my company." "It is not stealing, Elena," I said calmly. "It is capitalism. You leveraged your equity to pay for your ego. You missed the payments. We bought the paper." I motioned to the side of the stage. My legal team, led by a very smug Jordan Pike, walked out. He was carrying a thick binder. "This is the confirmation of the share transfer," I said. and this is the resolution passed by the new majority shareholder me 10 minutes ago." I looked Eleanor in the eye. "You are removed as chairwoman of the board, effective immediately for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty." Eleanor looked at me, and then she snapped. The mask of the refined socialite fell away, revealing the ugly, snarling creature beneath. "You miserable little muffing!" she shrieked into the microphone. Her voice cracked, echoing painfully through the speakers. "You think you can take this from me? I am Elena Carver. This is my blood. You are just a barren, dry womb that my son threw away." The room went dead silent. Phones were raised. Every single person was recording. "You were never good enough," Elena continued, pacing the stage like a caged animal. "We needed an heir. We needed pure blood to carry on the name, not some middle-class nobody who couldn't even keep a pregnancy. I did what I had to do to protect my son from your failure. A woman who cannot breed is useless to this family." She was destroying herself. I stood perfectly still, letting her pour the gasoline. "You have no right to stand here," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You have no children. You have no legacy. You are empty." I waited until she ran out of breath. I waited until the echo of her cruelty hung in the air, sickening and absolute. "Actually," I said quietly, "I think there is one more slide." I clicked the remote. The screen changed. It was not a financial chart. It was a scanned document from the state medical board. The headline was "Massive License Suspended. Dr. Morgan Foster cited for unethical conduct and patient manipulation." Underneath, highlighted in yellow, was a summary of the findings. Physicians accepted third-party payments to administer high-dose contraceptives to patients seeking fertility treatments, disguising the medication as vitamin supplements. The gasp from the audience was different this time. It was a sound of collective horror. "I am not barren, Elena," I said, my voice trembling slightly for the first time. "I never was. I spent 2 years thinking my body was broken. I spent 5 years thinking I wasn't enough. But I wasn't broken. I was poisoned." I looked at Nate. He was staring at the screen, his mouth open. He looked at his mother. "You paid him," Nate whispered. The microphone caught it. "Mom, you paid him. I did it for you." Elena yelled, not realizing she was confessing to a crime. She was dragging you down. She would have trapped you with a mediocre life. "I bought you freedom. You bought me a grave," Nate said. I stepped back to the microphone. "I thought I was infertile until I met a doctor who wasn't on the Carver payroll," I said to the crowd. "And as for legacy," I hesitated. I looked at the sea of faces. I thought about Leo and Meyer at home, safe with Marcus. I decided not to show their picture. They did not belong to this world. They were mine. "My legacy is just fine," I said. "But yours ends tonight." I nodded to Jordan Pike. "By the authority of the majority shareholder," Jordan announced into his own mic, "Nathaniel Carver is hereby removed as CEO pending an independent investigation into corporate malfeasance and fraud. Security, please escort Mr. Carver and the former chairwoman off the premises." The hotel security guards, the same ones who had opened doors for Elena for decades, stepped onto the stage. They looked uncomfortable, but they knew who signed the checks. "Now, escape," Elena screamed as a guard took her elbow. "I will sue you. I will ruin you." "You can try," I said, echoing the words I had spoken in the conference room. Nate did not fight. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were filled with a terrible dawning realization of what he had lost. Not just the money, not just the company, but the life we could have had, the children he didn't know existed. He slumped, letting the guard guide him away. The crowd parted for them, not out of respect, but out of revulsion. They were payers. In 10 minutes, I had stripped them of their wealth, their power, and their reputation. I stood alone at the podium. The lights were hot. My heart was pounding. "The gala is over," I said into the microphone. "But the open bar is still available. Please have a drink on North Bridge in Berlin." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black. I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the chaos behind me. I did not look back at the ruins of the Carver Empire. I had burned it down just as I promised, and from the ashes I could finally breathe. The adrenaline that had sustained me on the stage began to ebb away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. The ballroom was emptying, the guests fleeing the scent of scandal like rats, abandoning a sinking ship. I did not stay to watch the exodus. I retreated to a small glass-walled executive meeting room near the kitchens, the only place that offered a momentary sanctuary from the flashbulbs. I was not alone for long. The door clicked open and Nate slipped inside. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who had posed for magazine covers. His tie was undone, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had been stripped of his skin. "Arver," he breathed, closing the door behind him. The sound of the party cleanup was muffled, creating a sudden, intimate silence. "There is nothing left to say, Nate," I said, leaning against the edge of the heavy oak table. "The lawyers will handle the transition. You should probably call a criminal defense attorney for your mother." "I did not know she was going to do that speech," Nate said, his voice trembling. He took a step toward me, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I did not know she was going to say those things about you being barren. That was cruel. That was the least of her crimes." "Nate," I replied coldly. He looked down at his expensive shoes. "I know about the fraud, or I suspected it." I stiffened. "What did you say?" "After you left," Nate whispered, unable to meet my eyes. "A year later, I was looking through some old insurance files for a tax audit. I saw a coding error on Dr. Foster's payments. It looked like hush money. I asked Mom about it. She told me to leave it alone. She said it was handled." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I was a coward. Arver, I knew something was wrong. I knew she had done something to drive you away, but I did not dig deeper. I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid of her." I looked at him, and any lingering ember of affection I might have held for him turned to ash. "You are not a victim, mate," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You saw smoke, and you walked away because you did not want to burn your hands. Your choice was silence, and your silence cost me 5 years of my life. It cost me my body. It cost me my dignity. I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry." The door flew open with a bang. Alina marched in. She had been stripped of her microphone, but not her venom. Her makeup was smeared, and her gold dress looked gaudy under the harsh fluorescent lights of the meeting room. "Get up, Nathaniel," she barked. "Stop sniveling in front of her. We are not finished. I have called the governor. I have called the bank. We will fix this." She turned her glare on me. "And you think you have won. You have humiliated us for one night. Congratulations, but you are still a nobody. Arver, you can take the company. You can take the money, but you will never have what really matters." She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You will go home to your empty apartment with your cats and your spreadsheets. The Carver line ends with Nate, thanks to you. But at least there are no mongrel children running around with my name attached to them. At least I spared the family that indignity." I looked at Elena Carver. I looked at the woman who had poisoned me, mocked me, and tried to erase me, and I felt a strange, calm sense of finality. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I typed a single line to Leaner, who was waiting in the lobby. "Bring them." "You are right." "Eleanor," I said softly, "there are no children with the Carver name." "Exactly." She sneered. "Because you are broken." I stared at the door. Wait. 30 seconds later, there was a knock. The door opened. Leaner Cruz stepped in. She was holding the hands of 2 5-year-olds. Lee was wearing a tiny navy blazer and bow tie. Meyer was wearing a cream-colored dress with a velvet ribbon. They looked around the room with wide, curious eyes, taking in the tension without understanding it, but the resemblance was undeniable. Leo had Nate's chin and his messy hair. Meyer had the exact shape of Eleanor's eyes, softened by my smile. They were the perfect synthesis of Carver genetics and William's resilience. Elena stopped breathing. Her hand flew to her throat. She staggered back, hitting the wall. "But," she croaked. "Who are they?" Nate turned slowly. He looked at the twins. Then he looked at me, then back at the twins. His knees gave out and he collapsed into one of the leather chairs, gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. "Arver," Nate whispered. "Are they Dr. Foster told you the embryos were non-viable?" I said, my voice steady. "He lied. He froze them. I sued for custody after the divorce. I carried them alone. I birthed them alone. And I raised them alone. I walked over to the kids, kneeling down to straighten Leo's tie. I turned them slightly so they faced their father and grandmother. "This is Leo," I said, "and this is Meyer." "My God," Eleanor whispered. Tears began to leak from her eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of shock. She took a step forward, her hands reaching out like claws. "My grandchildren, they are my grandchildren." They looked just like Nathaniel. "Do not touch them," I said. The command was not loud, but it froze her in place. "They are my blood," Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking. "You hid them from us. You stole my heirs." "I protected my children," I corrected her, standing up and blocking her path. "I protected them from a woman who thinks people are assets. I protected them from a father who was too weak to defend their mother." Nate was weeping openly now, his face buried in his hands. "I have a son," he moaned. "I'd have a daughter. Oh, God. Arvar, please let me see them. Let me explain." He tried to stand up, moving toward us. Leo shrank back against my leg. Meyer grabbed my hand tight. "No," I said, putting a hand on Nate's chest to stop him. "I am their father," Nate cried. "Being a father is a verb." "Nate," I said, "it is an action. It is showing up when things are hard. It is protecting your family. You did none of those things. You signed a paper that said I was useless if I did not breed for you. You lost your right to these children 5 years ago. But I can change," Nate begged. "I have money." "Well, I have money. I can be better. Please, Arvar, do not keep them from me." "I am not keeping them from you out of spite." I said, "I am keeping them from you because you are toxic. You and your mother are a disease that eats people alive. I will not let you infect them." I looked at both of them. "Their last name is Williams," I declared. "They will grow up in a house where love is not a transaction. They will know their worth is not tied to a stock price. When they are 18, if they want to find you, that will be their choice. But until then, you do not exist to them." Suddenly, there was movement at the door. I looked up to see Camille standing there. She had seen everything. She had heard everything. She looked at Nate, huddled in the chair weeping. She looked at Eleanor, who was staring at the twins with a hungry, desperate madness. Camille walked over to Nate. She took the diamond engagement ring off her finger and dropped it into his lap. "Camille." Nate looked up, startled. "You do not need a class, your woman." "Nate," Camille said, her voice shaking but clear. "You need to become a decent man first." She looked at me, gave a small, respectful nod, and walked out of the room. Her head held high. Eleanor ignored her. She was still fixated on the twins. "I will sue you for visitation," she hissed. "I have rights, grandparents' rights." "Try it," I said. "I have your medical fraud on public record. I have your financial crimes on every news channel in America. No judge in this country will let you within 500 ft of these children." I turned to Lear. "We are leaving." "Wait." Elena lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. "Arvar, please. Just let me hold them once. Just once. I can fix this. I can make you rich. I can give them the world." I pulled my arm away with a sharp jerk. "You had your chance." "Eleanor," I said, "I begged you to believe me. I begged you to treat me like a human being. You chose to treat me like livestock. Now you can live in the empty house you built." I took Meyer's hand. Leaner took Leo's hand. "Say goodbye." I told the twins. "We are going to find Uncle Marcus and get ice cream. Bye-bye." Meyer waved at the crying man in the chair. "Don't be sad." Her innocence was the final knife twist. Nate let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. We walked out of the room. I did not look back. In the hallway, Dater, Hart, and Marcus were waiting. Marcus looked worried until he saw us. He dropped to one knee and opened his arms. "Did we win the battle?" Marcus asked Leo. "Mommy yelled at the bad lady." Leo reported cheerfully. "And then we left." "Sounds like a win to me," Marcus said, standing up and looking at me. His eyes were full of pride. "You okay?" "I am better than okay," I said. I felt light. The weight of 5 years of anger had evaporated. Daner handed me my coat. "The board is convening an emergency session in the morning to formalize the takeover," she said. "But for tonight, you are off the clock." We walked toward the exit. The valet brought my car around, but I shook my head. "I want to walk a bit," I said. "The air is nice." We stepped out of the Carva Grand Hotel. The night air was crisp and clean. The city lights of Chicago twinkled before us, a vast ocean of possibility. I stopped for a moment and looked through the plate glass window of the lobby. Inside the small meeting room, I could see them. Eleanor and Nate were standing up now, screaming at each other. They were two scorpions in a bottle, finally turning their poison on the only thing left, each other. Their empire was gone. Their legacy was gone. I turned my back on them. I looked down at Leo and Meyer. They were skipping on the sidewalk, pointing at the moon, completely unaware of the war I had just fought for them. I squeezed their hands tight. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Meyer asked. "Forward, B," I said. "We are going forward." We walked into the night, leaving the darkness behind us, stepping into a future that was finally completely our own. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been an emotional journey, and I would love to know what you think about Arvor's decision in the end. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I love connecting with you guys from all over the world. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button so we can share this story with even more people. See you in the next video.